Good evening. I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive, and welcome to the second in our series of open conversations, our town hall meetings, done here on Facebook Live with an opportunity to discuss an issue of some importance here in Westchester County. Tonight our topic is economic development, and I'm going to touch on a few of the different things that the county has as economic development strategies, and then we're going to open it up to some questions. First, some questions that we've received from a variety of different sources that'll be posed by Catherine Chaffee, who's our Director of Communications and with me here at the table. And then as you're watching this, you're welcome to put your comments in the comments section of the Facebook post. And if it is in the form of a question, Catherine will try to form it together. Some people ask similar questions, pull it together in a singular question. I'll do my best to answer it as best as we can. This town hall series, which began 2 weeks ago when we talked about senior issues, will continue in the weeks to come. We're going to be talking about a range of issues in each of the different sessions. We'll be talking about veterans issues. 1 week we'll be touching on women's issues, and another week in due time housing and a host of other different policy areas. But we wanted to have sort of this informal way of dialogue. It's very hard with the COVID crisis that we have now. We're unable to do the kind of in-person meetings, in-person town halls that we would normally be doing. And we had a series where I met with local county legislators at local facilities in each of the different 17 districts around the county, coffee and conversation, where we had this sort of an informal discussion. But in the days of COVID, it's hard to come up with a venue that works for everybody, and some folks are not comfortable coming out. So we're using this format. Hopefully it's of some interest to you, and we'll be together until 7 o'clock and hopefully have an intelligent conversation about economic development. I want to talk conceptually a little bit about that issue of economic development as I see it and as we see it here in this administration. When I grew up in this county, I was born here in Westchester County, 1953. In my young preteen years and teenage years, Westchester County went through a phenomenal economic growth. There was a certain amount of growth in the 1950s, and then it really exploded in the 1960s. And you saw a lot of things happen here. That's when the interstate highway system was completed, I-287, I-684, and it connected Westchester to the rest of the world in a very significant way. And while I wasn't paying attention to that while I was in junior high school and elementary school and playing Little League Baseball and so forth, Westchester's economy exploded primarily because it was able to attract major U.S. corporations that were housed in New York City and bring their headquarters out to Westchester County. In so doing, it opened up the real estate market in Westchester County. It opened up the tax base for most of these local communities. Major corporate headquarters were big hiring pools for very talented individuals. Some people moved in from elsewhere in the country. Some lived elsewhere in the metropolitan area, wanted to live closer to headquarters. And we became the home of so many Fortune 500 companies, it's really hard to remember them. To this day, we're still the home for IBM, for PepsiCo, for MasterCard, and some of those companies came in the 60s, some came later than that in the 70s. And we had at various other points in time, Texaco, Nestle USA, a number of other major corporations, and some of them have gone through restructure and have merged. We were the home for General Foods for many years, and then it was acquired by Kraft Foods, and the headquarters entity went to Illinois. But we've also, even to this day, still host many of the most famous names in the business world, brand names that you're accustomed with, that have Westchester either USA headquarters on behalf of a multinational corporation or the worldwide headquarters here. In addition to having IBM today and PepsiCo, MasterCard, Regeneron, which is a homegrown facility here and a tremendous biotech asset in the country, tremendously expanding organization. We're also the home for Heineken USA, for Danone North America. You may know Danone better by products like Dannon Yogurt and Evian Water. We have Zeiss, which is based here in Westchester County. We really have such a large number of major corporations, and then other corporations that have significant operations here. Coca-Cola has a bottling plant here, and so many other organizations. So the perception that I would have had in my teenage years, even into my early 20s, which would bring us into the 1970s, was that economic development was Westchester County going out and getting a big major U.S. corporation to relocate here with an influx of jobs. The gentleman whose name is on this building, Edwin McCallion, who was the fourth county executive, and he served the longest tenure 16 years from 1957 to 1973, was really the father of modern Westchester County government and the growth that Westchester County experienced. But things have changed in the society, and I think we all see it with advancing technology. There's a different way that we look at things and a different way that we conduct our business. We're seeing it in everyday ways of life, the way we consume our news, the way we purchase products, and the way we look at our work environment has changed. And of course, with COVID, those changes have rapidly advanced. And what we're seeing now, I think, is a different way to look at economic development, because it is less now about the moving of major headquarters and rather the development of small businesses. And small businesses beginning with an individual, an entrepreneur, and an idea, and trying to nurture that individual and their idea into a vibrant organization, a vibrant business organization that's profitable. And so our focus on small businesses is very much more of what we look at, I think, in this 21st century. And now that we're beginning the third decade of the 21st century, as much more of the path for the future of Westchester County. We have certain natural advantages that help us in economic development. We have a very well-educated workforce. We have a good transportation system. We can get in and out of New York City extremely easily. The commutation, I should say, into Manhattan is easy and accessible. We're going through a down period now because of COVID, but we believe that will come back up. We have a county airport, which is proximate to our business centers. And we have an interstate highway system and a thruway system that can connect people very easily in and out of Westchester County. And those are advantages that we have over some of the other suburbs that ring New York City. And of course, our greatest advantage is New York City at the center of all of this. So New York City's success is important to Westchester, a pivotal part of Westchester's success. But as we try to craft our economic development plans from a governmental standpoint, we also understand something. In addition to the fact that small is the new big, government is not the engine to develop the economy. Government is a partner in the development of the economy. And I think that's a very important situation to look at. I've often thought that many times those of us in public office take too much credit when things go well, and we get too much blame when things go wrong. Government is a player in the game, and an important player, by the things we incentivize, the way we structure taxation, the way we create a climate by which a business can grow. But so many times it's what happens in the marketplace that's beyond the reach of government and beyond the concerns that government can address. So we really have to be much more strategic about our thinking in the way we approach this. And I think the foundation of all of the things that we'll talk about in this conversation tonight begins with understanding government's proper role as a partner in a drama that includes other players in the game. Some of those players include our business associations here in Westchester County, the Business Council of Westchester, Westchester County Association, both major associations of business that are involved in reaching out to different corporations to retain the businesses we have and to try to attract new businesses. Our local chambers of commerce, and I think they've been neglected for many years in this process of economic development. Those chambers of commerce often represents the local merchants on the downtown villages and the downtown towns and the small cities of Westchester County. And those thriving businesses represent a definition for those communities that attract people to come here, residential population, people who feel comfortable living in the Armonks and the Bronxvilles and the Ryes and the Larchmonts and the Pelhams of this county because they have a vibrant small business district. So their economic health is very much a part of our economic development strategy. I'm going to mention just very much in passing, and then as we start to get into questions, try to identify a little bit more of some of the substance behind it. But some of the things that we've tried to do differently often have come from the dialogue we've had with our economic development team. I want to identify Bridget Gibbons, who is our Director of Economic Development. She's a resident in the Bronxville, Yonkers area. She has worked in large corporations. She has owned her own business. And in coming into this administration, she brings those two points of view. And she's been with us since day one. Deb Novick is now the Assistant Director of Economic Development with us. Deb is also a resident of the Sound Shore. She was involved in incubator work most recently here in Westchester County and has now come on board with us and brings that expertise to the table. Shari Rosen Asher, who is with us as well, is our liaison that deals with our local Chamber of Commerce. And she is a terrifically dynamic and really a good person who can understand how to make the links between very small businesses and government and solve problems in a very practical way. We have also on our team Corazon Pineda, who is working with us, and she also is in her own public capacity as an elected official in the city of Yonkers. Chloe Zung is with us, a very bright young woman who serves to help us with our economic development activities. Some of the tools we have to work with, some of them are tools that other governments have as well. We have a Westchester County Industrial Development Agency, the IDA. The IDA, which is chaired by Joan McDonnell, our Director of Operations, provides the capacity for incentives for the development of business. And those incentives can include tax-exempt bonds, reduction in sales tax, reduction in mortgage recording tax, all designed to lower the costs of a developer or a person in a business who wants to expand their business, refinance their business, and develop new jobs by that activity. The IDA meets on a regular basis, composed of some additional appointees, and those individuals discuss and hopefully approve certain projects for this type of discount in the costs that will help them make this work. There is a companion entity, a local development corporation, the LDC, which is the same function that the IDA provides, but they provide it to not-for-profits. So when you have an organization that is, again, a not-for-profit, a religious institution, educational institution, they can go to the LDC for the same type of financial assistance that a corporation could go to for the IDA. We have a normal structure in county government of capital projects on county-owned land, on county roadways, and the infrastructure that we invest oftentimes is critical in economic development. Where we extend our sewer system allows development to occur. How we handle our roadway system can allow development to occur. And so as much as the investment that we make as part of our capital projects have an intrinsic, let's improve the quality of life, it can also help us with our economic development activities. We have had a number of different innovative things that we've done in the last few years, and many of them are in their infancy, and we want to see them grow and nurture. Through Bridget's vision, we created an incubator program called Element 46. And Element 46 is a way to help incent the individual who has that entrepreneurial idea and can begin their business but doesn't have the infrastructure to really make a go of it, whether it's physical space, whether it's access to expertise, the kind of people that can help them develop a financial plan and a marketing plan. And so Element 46, which is now in a second round of organizations that are with it, get assistance from Westchester County. It's not just monetary assistance. It's all of the kind of assistance that you need to grow something. You think of an incubator for a baby in a medical setting, and all around that baby are medical services that take care of it and take the baby and help it grow. And that's exactly what the incubator concept is. It's very innovative in many other areas. It's worked, and so now Westchester, through Element 46, is working on that. We are engaged in the process of embracing opportunity zones. We have some outside consultants from Ferrandino and Associates that are helpful in the process. Opportunity zones are a federal program that provides some very significant tax credits in certain kinds of real estate situations targeted to zones that have been created at the recommendation of the state by the federal government, zones right here in Westchester County. And as we sort of identify the program specifics and make it possible for various developers to access these credits for certain kinds of developments, this really helps advance whether or not they can do the project that they intend to do. And so we want to be helpful to the local governments in being able to apply these opportunity zones for the sake of business expansion. We have signed an arrangement to lease 60 acres of land located in the town of Mount Pleasant, sort of bordered between the Sprain Parkway and Route 9A. And those 60 acres just north of where the Westchester Medical Center sits right now is county-owned land on the Grasslands campus. And that leasing to Ferrari Associates is as they are trying to develop a biotech facility. We call the project North 60 because it's the 60 acres that is in the northern part of our Grasslands reservation. We have a long-term lease with Ferrari Associates as they make this effort. And the belief is because of the relative proximity of Regeneron, Siemens, which is also located within a mile or two of that location, the access to roadways and other means of transport, that could be the place where you can start to get 1 and 2 and 3 and then a cluster of biotechnical organizations. And so that effort, which is not done by the county government. Our contribution to the cause is the leasing of the land, but we hope that will turn into something of some significance going forward. I don't want to carry on an hour-long narrative. I want this to be a dialogue on different issues. But the point is that economic development in this county is not simply a matter of doing one thing or two things or having one big effort to recruit a business in. From the outside looking in, those are victories when they occur. But given the mature development of Westchester County, where we don't have all the open land that some of our counties a little further out, like Orange County, do, we have to be creative and we have to be very nimble to be able to move through what is a difficult environment. And then also our taxation policy is a part of that. We have cut county property taxes last year. I would hope, depending on how the budget looks, that we could do that again. But general tax cuts do not necessarily incent development, because what makes a company decide to build, grow in a certain location is not simply based on how much money they pay in taxes. It depends on some of these other factors. Is there workforce housing for the people that work for them? Do they have access to their markets? Do they have access for people to reach other target markets that would provide the services, products that they develop at their headquarters or main location? So there are a number of other factors that go into this. Hopefully we'll show flexibility in that area. And all of this comes in the age of COVID, where we're doing everything differently, and we hope we're being flexible so that whatever we do to advance our economy, we're reducing the spread of this virus so that we put the virus behind us in due time, and then we rejoin our economic thrust forward as a county and as a nation. That's a long lead in, but it does create a little bit of a framework for some of the things we'll talk about. So, Catherine, we received some questions. Why don't we touch on it? We'll go from there.
Absolutely. So the first question that's coming from the audience this evening is, what is Westchester County doing to help our businesses and nonprofits survive through the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, the county has launched a couple of programs, some large and some small. Just today we announced a program that is funded by $10 million from the Federal CARES Act. And CARES is an acronym that stands for Corona. Help me out with the different elements of it. But it's a coronavirus response resource for the county government and for other governments as well, the CARES Act. And $10 million of that amount of money, do you have it, Catherine?
I have it. It's the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security.
Okay, there's always a good acronym behind every program. You have to remember to remember these things. But in any event, the $10 million that's set aside, that we have set aside out of money allocated to the county, we looked at the program regulations and determined that we could create a grants program that would help those businesses that have suffered economic hardship because of coronavirus. And this program that we've announced is called Business First Grant Program. We'll have up to $49,000 in grants available for businesses. They first have to have a workforce 99 workers or less, so they qualify as a small business. We're not doing this to help those companies that are already very large and have other resources to tap into. Number two, they had to have been a viable business prior to the point at which the governor shut down the economy, which we date to the executive order on March 7th. And of course, what has caused the economic problems for all of us, the advancement of the virus, had to be dealt with by shutting down a host of different industries, a host of different businesses, retail and restaurants. We all know what we've just lived through for the last 6 months, and we're still living through. But you had to have been a viable business as of that point in time going forward in order to be eligible. You cannot be receiving benefits for similar purposes from some other sources. The federal government has a program called EIDL, E-I-D-L, Economic Injury Distress Loans, and that program can't be used in concert with this program, for the same duplicate costs. Also in this, you must also be in good standing with Westchester County. I assume that means you don't have any outstanding tax liabilities with us and things that might also represent a negative. But the program, and it will open up this week, we'll have, as of the first of the week, we'll have applications available. You can, if you're interested as a business, you can go onto our westchestercatalyst.com website and follow the prompts so that you can both get information about the program and you can also get the information you need to file an application for the program. There will be a competitive element to this. There will be scoring based on how large the organization is, how much grant money they're asking for, what the employment structure will be of the organization if they receive the grant, and how they project ahead their economic health. They have to be able to be a viable organization, and this helps them rather than this is what substantially is viable. But we think it's very exciting. I was just on a Zoom call with the New Rochelle Chamber of Commerce that I slipped in before we had this conversation, because it is moving about the Westchester business community as a good step forward. We're very happy that Dr. Marsha Gordon, who's the president and CEO of the Business Council of Westchester, was with us here for that launch earlier today, and we think that's going to be a very helpful step in the right direction. COVID-related injury, COVID-related economic problems, this money is meant for that purpose. That's $10 million set aside, maximum grant number $49,000. We have a separate program that we put into place. It's an IDA loan and grant program. We deal with a much smaller base of money. That's $500,000, $500,000, made available through our Industrial Development Agency. And our IDA grant program is really targeted with smaller increments of money. It's $10,000 grant, $25,000 loan, 0% loan. You pay back the loan at the value of which you received it. And the businesses that apply for that are using this money specifically for personal protective equipment that you would need to have in order to deal with the coronavirus. So there's a direct correlation here. We know that masks and gloves worn by employees have to be constantly changed in order to avoid spreading the disease and to protect employees and customers from that, certainly in a retail environment, a restaurant environment, and so forth. And businesses are eligible to apply for these. The IDA will vote on the applications, and again, there's a component by which each application is judged in degree of worthiness and granted out. And for some businesses, this could be a pivotal way to get solvent. Instead of the organization having to put out this money, that the county is happy to help with this. And we think that's an important program as well. So those are at least two examples of some of the creative efforts that we put into to try to deal with what we're dealing right now with COVID.
Another COVID-related question from the audience. Are there any programs such as webinars or online training that the county could offer to help businesses adapt to the COVID-19 crisis?
Yes, we've done some of that already through the county health department component. We have Dr. Charlita Amler as our Commissioner of Public Health, Renee Recchia, Peter DeLucia, some of the senior managers of that organization have been involved in a series of webinars. We've targeted them to different audiences, most recently to the school community. As the schools get ready to open during this pandemic, many of them are opened now in a hybrid format where there's some in-class studying and some remote. Some of the school districts are still remote and haven't gone to the in-class situation yet. But the webinars we've created really give good advice on how to sanitize a facility to make sure that they're protected, how best to socially distance given the nature of the entity. We practice these things when we open the beach and when we open a pool, and it's a different task for each different kind of entity. And so those types of webinars can be adjusted and made present to all of our different businesses as well. This is where the work that Shari Asher does through the local chambers of commerce really matter. And if we do an activity like that, we'll do it targeted to the local chamber of commerce, who has the best access to the businesses in their area. And all we're doing really is taking experts to come in and do something as simple as show you a video on what is proper hand washing and sanitizing, to the much more complicated, how do you take a facility and make it as COVID-free as you can before people come in and use it. So that is part of what our programs are.
Okay, one question that's coming in from Facebook. The loan program that was announced today, is it open to nonprofits as well?
Yes, it's open to nonprofits as well as businesses. The real exemptions to the programs, obviously, if you're above 99 employees, if you have other grant money that's coming in, those make you ineligible for the program. And the other qualification here is we cannot use this money for franchises of national chains that might be in the area. You think of a Subway sandwich shop type of situation where the local business is a franchise of a national organization. That franchisee looks to the national organization for support. We're trying to help the mom and pop businesses that are local. But not-for-profits are also eligible for that money, as are businesses.
So So we have our first non-COVID question coming in. The audience member writes, I'm interested in starting a new business. Are there any programs that the county offers to help startups?
Well, I think the Element 46 program, the one that I referenced, is a very good place to start. I think, anytime a person is prepared to start a business, what it usually means is they have a certain expertise in an area. Perhaps they've worked in a larger organization doing a particular function. They know that function well. They determine how they can get some capitalization to get a business started, and they want to know how do they get the extra expertise they need to make this happen. If you have a background in marketing or a background in finance, then you're built in to having those expertise, but you need assistance beyond that. And I think the best thing to do is to call our economic development team here. 995-2900 is the general number here on our executive floor, 995-2900. Bridget Gibbons is our economic development leader. And then have a conversation with one of our folks and say, this is what I intend to do. It could be a sole proprietor, a sole practitioner organization. It might be something where you're opening, a bakery with 3 or 4 employees, whatever that might be. It could be retail, it could be a service industry. We'll talk through with you the specifics. Now, there are other resources out there. The Service Corps of Retired Executives, SCORE, exists to provide some expertise, and while that's not directly with us, that's an area we can work together with them. We have a one-stop program for workforce development, which focuses on the employment side of this, but also the business participation side. So a conversation with Bridget or one of her key people will probably help the person identify what they need in specific, and then how we can match up, if we can, that specific. Or if it's beyond the scope of something we're doing in government, it might be a program that one of the major business organizations can be helpful to them. We'll know that, and we can connect that person to the person who would know more about how to help them.
There's a lot of buzz about the loan program that was the program that was announced today. So somebody has asked the name of it. So it is the Business First Grant Program.
Business First Grant Program.
Yes, and again, you can go to westchestercatalyst.com to get information on that program and to get information about webinars and mentoring programs that we have at the county level to help businesses adapt to COVID.
And I would say that if a person has a specific concern. I mean, you naturally in situations like this speak generically across a host of different areas. Person who wants to start a business has very specific ideas of what they need to know to accomplish. I would suggest when you go in there, you'll see an email address. Structure your question or structure your ask in that email, and then you'll get a response from one of our key people, and that will open up the dialogue. And so you can kind of fine-tune it down to a level where you can get the information you need in order to do that. And you can see from some of the questions, and those of you watching, so much of business development is small business. And small business employs a lot more people in Westchester County than the larger corporations do. And the small businesses, have had a very rocky road because of COVID. It's made it very difficult. Some businesses have gone under because of that. And therefore, that extra expertise might be the difference of surviving or not surviving as a small business.
We just got another question on this from Alfredo. He wants to know, are schools and churches eligible for grants to address sanitizing?
Well, I would go back to the PPE program grant, number one. Certainly churches would be. We're dealing with school districts in a separate fashion. But if this is an independent school, charter school or a parochial school, they would be eligible, and they should contact us. But if we're dealing with a public school system, we are trying to deal with those needs separately through the state, because the state has tasked us with working with the public school systems in order to open.
Okay. So the next question is, what is the county's financial situation right now?
Well, we were hit pretty hard by this, and primarily in the loss of projected revenue. When we balanced the county budget and voted for it, the Board of Legislators voted for it, I signed it into law back in December of last year, we were able to deal with a $2.1 billion budget and accomplish most of the ends that we intended to, and still deliver a very small tax cut, a $1 million cut in property tax levy. Now, most of the additional spending in the 2020 budget over 2019 budget were created by state mandates that involve criminal justice issues like bail and discovery changes, that required us to spend more money in the DA's office and more money in policing and so forth along those lines. A year before that, we had changes in the in the incarceration of young people, raised the age, so that became additional spending. And much of what the county government does, 65%, 70% of our budget are mandates, things that we're required to do by the state. They require us to run a jail. They require us to have a probation department that goes along with having the jail, so that when individuals pay their respect to the society, pay their debt to society, that they still have a probationary period that follows their incarceration. Those are requirements. We're required to treat sewage. We're required to have a public health department. All necessary things, but things that have to be budgeted. So when we closed off our budget, we were balanced. We had done a number of good fiscal policy things. We had identified we were going to add money to our reserve fund, which would be fine. COVID hits us in the middle of March, and what affects us dramatically is the drop in revenues, particularly sales tax revenue, and then a host of ancillary revenues, hotel occupancy tax revenue, and so forth. Once the economy slows down and stops, people aren't buying, they don't buy the product, there's no sales tax driven by that product, and we fall off the numbers pretty dramatically. At worst case scenario, we saw a gap in our budget that was somewhere between $150 million to $200 million. That's a huge amount of money for a budget that's $2.1 billion. If you do the math, you'll see it's a significant percentage. So we've taken some action starting in April. We didn't wait. We take some action in April, and in May we made some decisions that were not ideal, but in so doing we were able to start to bring that gap, if you want to peg the gap in the middle of 175 million or 170 million, we started to bring that gap down. Where we are now, as we project ahead, we feel that we've gotten the gap now under 50 million as we projected. It has to do with three things that we can't predict as we sit here in this conversation in September. Number one, how much sales tax revenue recoup will we have as the economy opens up more and more? Right now in September, we've seen a steady increase in the economy opening up in June, July, August, and September. So the numbers have gotten better from the worst case scenario. They're not up to what the original estimates were. That money is lost. But it's better than the worst case scenario estimates that we were making. What we don't know is, will we get a second wave of COVID? Will the infection spike in a way that requires us to close back down certain things and thereby lose more revenue again? We don't know that. That's the first unknowable. The second unknowable is how the state government is going to balance their budget. They're obliged to pay us by law certain reimbursements, but they will assert that they don't have the money and they're only going to pay us 80% of the 100% that they owe us for one or more other functions. And they'll accrue it and they'll say, well, in a future year, we'll finally pay you back the money. But for this year's budget balancing, we could lose significant revenue. And we will have to figure out how to compensate for that. So it'll depend on how the state, in its final analysis, shifts some of the burdens of their financial issues to the County of Westchester. The third issue is the one that you've heard talked about on television all the time, which is, will the federal government step in and provide additional resources to local governments? And by local governments, not just the county, but the villages, the cities, the towns. The county government provides certain basic services like treating sewerage. The towns and villages provide fire services and sanitation. We're part of the sanitation service as well because we pick up what the local governments collect and transfer them to incineration or to recyclable facilities. But all of that is not knowable. Will the Fed step in and provide us some additional resources? So as we try to close our budget gap, not knowing if it's going to fluctuate up because of what the state might do or what's going to happen with the economy, we hope to get as low as we can. We hope the Feds will understand that we didn't do anything to create this crisis. We're just responding to it. And if we get some additional resources, we use that to balance out the budget, close out this year. We did one thing this year to deal with our fiscal policies. We lost my element on this, and that is we created a voluntary separation program for the workforce. And we had 226 county employees take advantage of it. It was an incentive for them to leave the workforce. Some of them might have retired, some of them might have just left. But by losing 226 people, we have lost 5% of our workforce. Now, we can't keep all of those positions empty because some of them involve essential services. But we're having to deal with, in as practical way as we can, the gap that we have, and lowering the workforce is part of that.
So we have two comments from Joe Ricca. First, he thanks you. He says the county's been an amazing partner with the school districts. For those of you who don't know, Joe Ricca is the superintendent of the White Plains public school system. And then he asks if you can explain the work that you've done with the school districts and how it relates to the economic recovery here in the county.
Well, I think we all understand that the public school system in Westchester County is one of the single biggest reasons why people move here. Proximity to New York City, safe streets, access to water, all important things. But I would argue, and I think no one would disagree with me, the single thing that we care about most in our lives are our children. And we want our children to be properly educated so they get the right start in life. And we have, out of 44 school districts in Westchester County, really, very many terrific school districts where a solid education will be a solid footing for our kids. Why do I give you the prep into it? Because the county government does not have direct responsibility for schools. That responsibility goes from the school district and the school board directly to the state of New York State Education Department. But it is in the county's economic interest to have a vibrant school district. So even if we don't have any direct responsibility or authority, partnering with the school districts makes infinitely good sense. We had a meeting, I think it was in late March, where myself and a couple of our key executives, Ken Jenkins, our deputy county executive, myself, met with a group of school superintendents. And they were pretty upset. They were upset over a host of different decisions that had been made. They weren't made by us, but they needed to express themselves. So they expressed themselves to state legislators and to the county legislators and the county executive branch. And at that point in time, we promised an ongoing partnership with the school districts, and we've tried to be true to that partnership. We do have, at the county government level, a responsibility to ensure the public health of all elements of Westchester County. That includes the public schools. So immediately we formed, with Dr. Ricca and his colleagues, assistants, a series of activities that would help them in the opening of their schools. We made it a point of trying to allow for school personnel to be fit for N95 masks, which does require a fitting to the individual's face, contour of their face, and we provided that assistance for them. We certainly had, as with every other public entity, we provided antibody testing at the Westchester County Center, which has been basically turned over to an ancillary medical facility, and we provided that ability to them. Those webinars that I alluded to before were public education targeted for school personnel, so they could see in a very clear way what they would have to do in order to reach the right level standards of sanitization, which would allow them to open their schools. And those webinars were helpful. There was Q&A involved in them, and we think that was an appropriate element. We provide at the county government level a certain baseline in contact tracing. And for those who are not familiar with the phrase, truthfully, I was not familiar with the phrase before the pandemic broke out. Contact tracing is when an individual gets on the phone. They are tracing the contacts that the individual who has tested positive has had over the last 2 weeks. Why 2 weeks? Because that's the incubation period of the virus. If you get the virus today, you may not show signs of it. Over the course of 2 weeks, if you show no signs of it, then you have defeated the virus in your system. Your antibodies have successfully fought it off. But during that 2-week period of time, you're infectious and you can infect other people. So the contact tracers talk to you and identify all of the different people that you might have interacted with so that individuals can be isolated if they've been exposed so they don't further spread the virus. When you try to cut down the number of human contacts of people who are close to someone who had the virus, you reduce the spread of the virus. And that contact tracing function is one that we've made available to the school districts through our normal Department of Health format. And it's backed up by the larger project, the Bloomberg project that's been done with the state on contact tracing. There's a couple of school districts, they're still closed right now, where the Beeline bus system serves as the conduit by which kids get to major schools. New Rochelle, Yonkers, Mount Vernon have that. So the county has an involvement there. And hopefully what we get out of this relationship is a willingness to help them work through problems. We've done things like at Playland, we hosted the graduation for Rhinebeck High School, Dr. Barbara Ferraro and her district, and we were able to use a facility that we had, make it available at affordable price to a school district so they could conduct what for them was hopefully the best possible graduation in the days of COVID. So we're looking at those kinds of options to be helpful where we can. And I think Dr. Ricca himself should take a bow because he has been very easy for us to work with on behalf of his colleagues. We had an incident happen a couple of days ago in Tuckahoe where a child, or an individual rather, in the district tested positive. We worked very closely with Dr. Amy Goodman, who's the superintendent of the Tuckahoe schools. She's very appreciative of that relationship. We were able to do what was necessary to isolate the case and make sure there wasn't an outbreak. And those level of interactions is what the county is very appreciative of having with the school districts.
Okay, the next question comes from Richard Wishney. He says, can you please explain the timing of the county budget process and how citizens can participate in providing input to the process?
Sure. Well, Richard, who has served in public office in a number of different positions, he was a town supervisor in the town of Ossining, served in the county legislature, headed our Budget and Appropriations Committee, is well familiar with the process that unfortunately not everybody is familiar with. Westchester County works on a calendar year fiscal year, meaning January 1st begins the fiscal year, ends December 31st. The towns of Westchester County also operate on that calendar. 4 of the 6 cities also do. But villages, school districts, the state of New York, all different budget years. For us, it's a calendar year fiscal year. We have to have a budget adopted and in place by January 1st. So working back from the January 1st deadline, our county charter requires the county executive, to submit to the Board of Legislators the budget for the following year on or about November 10th. There's actually a little window of time that falls up to the middle of the month of November. I think the last day would be the 15th of November in general. And we submit the budget to the Board of Legislators for their review. Prior to that, the county executive branch does the work with our various departments to estimate what kinds of needs we're going to have for the next year, what kind of capital needs, what kind of operational needs, and then we pull those together into the documents necessary. The capital budget, which involves borrowing money to do physical improvements over a length of time, that particular budget, as a subset of the total budget, has to be presented to the Board of Legislators in the month of October. So they get the capital budget earlier than they get the full operating budget. They get the operating budget in November. Before that, we've instituted 2 public forums that occur generally in the month of October. We generally try to go north and south, in which we invite people to come in and give the executive branch input before we finalize the budget. That's never happened before our tenure, and we think it's been a helpful situation. Then there's a formal public hearing process that happens once the Board of Legislators gets the budget, and they will generally have 2 regional public hearings, usually again, one in northern Westchester, one in southern Westchester, leading up to the adoption of the budget. And those public hearings usually happen late in the month of November, early in the month of December, depending on how the calendar looks whenever Thanksgiving falls or what have you. Then the Board of Legislators has an opportunity to add any spending and add any revenue to the budget. Adds Day, it's known as. It's kind of a quirky way of doing things, but it's the Westchester way. It's worked very well for a long, long time. And then after all of the possible additions of revenue or expenses are put to the budget, then they have the final public hearing for people to comment on, and then the board does its final work, goes through the process, and ultimately, usually in a long day-long meeting, votes the budget. Usually happens around the 10th of December, give or take. And then at that point in time, the budget comes back upstairs to my attention. County executive has line item veto, so I can take out any line of the budget that's been added by the legislature. It's not a universal line item veto. I could veto the overall budget, haven't had to do that in the first 2 years. And then at that point, whatever vetoes might have happened, the budget goes back to the Board of Legislators for an override vote of 2/3, meaning of 17 members. If 12 members disagree with my veto, if I should veto something, they can override the veto and put it back into the budget, and then the budget is adopted. And generally, unlike other levels of government, we have never failed to deliver an on-time budget here in the county government. I served as a legislator for a number of years, went up to Albany for a number of years, came back down, and we've been able to hit the mark all the time. So that's as fast as I can say it. It's not the most exciting topic to cover, but I think what Richard Wishney highlights is something important that everybody should know, is that this level of government is an open government. It's a transparent government. You can have input. You can go to one of the 2 sessions before the budget is filed, one of the 3 public hearings after the budget is filed. You can send us emails asking questions, which we'll answer. I guess you can get on Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff too and make your opinions known. But we want to try to have as much input as we have. This 2021 budget is going to be a very tough budget. We don't know what the federal government is going to do, not just this year, but next year. And I'm afraid it doesn't look like the economy is going to do this immediate rebound today or tomorrow.
We have a lot of questions coming in, and we're going to try to get
Okay,
to
I'll try to be
as many as we can.
No, it's okay.
But for those listening, if we don't get to your question, we will respond on social media. So the next question comes from Brenda. She writes, "Dear County Executive Latimer, I'm concerned about the future of our small stage theater business in Westchester. Is there a plan to have a grant set up to help us survive? We've been forced to close since the beginning of March, and there's no conversation about the reopening target date."
Well, there's two elements, Brenda, that I think have to be looked at. The first one is whether or not the theater that you have falls under the governor's executive order that at this stage of the game has closed theaters in general. Now, since I don't have the executive order in front of me and I don't know your facility specifically, you would need to interact with us or through your lawyer or whatever to determine if the governor's executive order applies. If it does, then the only thing that can open the door for your opening of your theater is the governor, announcing a policy by which theaters could open, and that is something that's been lobbied for. We've had, we've seen many lobbying efforts being made by different industries to try to reopen their businesses. We had quite a lobbying for gyms and health clubs, which went an extended period of time before they were reopened. Governor finally made the announcement a few weeks ago, and then they opened, and now they're operating. But it took a certain amount of lobbying effort. So if it turns out that your business as a theater fits into the definition as the governor put it out, then no matter what kind of grantsmanship we might be able to find, the business can't open until the governor determines that it can. Now, let's work on the basis that however you're defined, you could open. The program I mentioned earlier about Business First is conceivably something that you could adjust to. And I would suggest you go on to the WestchesterCatalyst.com and look at that. You can also take a look at the other program I mentioned, the IDA Loan and Grants Program, because you'd be eligible for that. That's a small amount of money, and I'm not sure that's going to be significant enough for what I suspect is the need that you have. So I think the larger grant program would be helpful. But it's very difficult because, we have to fit around the fact that the county cannot give money to a private entity. In this case, we're allocating grant money because of COVID, which clearly is the reason why your theater closed, and we're using a certain pot of money that the feds gave us, and we have to use it by the end of the year, to help a business, in your case, bounce back from the COVID shutdown. So that's the logic and the legality of how we can do that. And I would certainly suggest, even as you assess whether or not your theater falls under the governor's restrictions, still look at and pursue the Westchester Catalyst Initiative and determine if that's helpful enough for what you're trying to do.
Okay. The next question from the audience is, what is the county's approach to public-private partnerships?
I think we have a practical mind to this. And because I spent 20 years in the private sector myself, I was a sales and marketing executive. I worked for subsidiaries of some major corporations, Nestle, ITT, as well as smaller organizations. No private sector entity takes on the burden of a public entity. The private business is going to take on a task if they think they can make it profitable. And there's certain functions of county government, much less other levels of government, that a private sector entity might say, if we took this over, we could run this more profitably. There are certain kinds of things that are better run in a private sector. There are certain things that are better run in a public sector. And certainly that's a debatable point politically in today's society. But having worked inside a business, the purpose of a public-private partnership from the business side is to see a growth possibility to make a profit. So from the public side of this, you have to look carefully, I think, and scrutinize what is it in for the interest of the people that you represent, the public at large, in the public-private partnership. And when you can find a marriage that works for both sides, then we're very supportive of it. The most prominent one that we voted to reauthorize is the public-private partnership that we have that runs our Beeline bus system with Liberty Lines. We walked in the door. We had a contract that was expiring at the end of our first year, the end of 2018. We renegotiated that contract during the summer of 2018. Let me once again compliment Joan McDonald, Director of Operations, John Noter, our county attorney. They worked together as a team, and during negotiations, things go back and forth. It can get little intense, but we came to closure with Liberty Lines. It was a good contract, a 5-year extension. So what expired at the end of 2018 is now extended to the end of 2023. And that public-private partnership saved significant money to Westchester County. They were able to identify how self-insurance was being handled, and they were able to reduce the cost of it and save Westchester County, I believe, in the vicinity of $20 million over 5 years. That's a public-private partnership that works. I alluded to the North 60 arrangement. That's a public-private partnership where we lease land and we forego a certain level of market rate payment for that land in order to incent the developer trying to create, excuse me, a business model for biotech businesses. That's a public-private partnership that works, and there are others like that. What doesn't work is when the public sector decides they want to devolve themselves of an asset, and at any cost, they're prepared to sell it or long-term lease it to a private entity and hands off and go ahead and do what you have to do with it. Or a profitable portion of county government, but because we want to securitize the money up front for some immediate purpose, we will let you pay us a lot of money up front and then very little over the long haul. And so we'll lose money perhaps over the long haul in order to get a short-term business benefit up front. Those kinds of public-private partnerships do not work. And they often come with generic rhetoric. The generic rhetoric is, well, governments are inefficient, businesses are efficient, so it is always better to have a business operate something and not so with the government. We've watched situations, as one example, with our power utilities and our telecommunications utilities. They are private entities. Some are structured as utilities, some are structured as corporations that provide a utility function. And we have seen that they're not always that efficient. They're not always able to provide the service that people want to see. In fact, over the course of those weekends after the hurricane came through, we had quite a lot of angry people in Westchester County who are angry. Their anger is expressed at us in public office because we went out in the public domain, but they were expressing anger over organizations, businesses, who did not provide the proper service. So it is not, in my judgment, a universal good or bad thing to have a public-private partnership. It's deal by deal, decision by decision. And I think because I have a business career, I'm not talking through my hat philosophically. I've seen what it is to have the business side as well as the public side of the public-private partnership. And we seek and will accept good partnerships that work for the people who live here in Westchester County.
We have a question that just came in from Jeff on Facebook. He writes, many communities are discovering the unmet needs and local capacity related to affordable and nutritious food. As a result, urban farming is becoming very popular. Can Westchester County be helpful in directing local organizers and farmers towards economic assistance or even land-based resources that the county has authority to facilitate in terms of harvesting and fiscal viability, like supporting farmers markets?
Well, there's a number of things that we do already in this area. I'm very happy that a number of years ago, Westchester County obtained Hilltop Hanover Farm in the town of Yorktown. And that has a farming function that exists to this day on it. We have a person who works for us who manages the farming function there. They actually have on the weekends a farmer's market based there. We can go and buy product that was grown right there on site at Hilltop Hanover. The broader interest that the questioner has, I think the county government can meet in part. We have certainly incentivized many of the food pantries feeding Westchester to try to help deal with food insecurity. And a certain amount of food insecurity can be dealt with by, those kind of local situations. Now, local growing situations is not equally available everywhere. We have some highly urbanized communities. City of Mount Vernon, Village of Portchester, almost no workable land for any broad-based farming initiative along the lines that you could theorize. On the other hand, and I'll use Portchester as an example, Village Trustee Alex Payan, members of the Village Board, the Portchester Housing Authority, have created a series, 2 or 3, for community gardens in each of those communities. Now, they're producing product that are consumed by the people within the complex. It's not open for public sale and beyond, but it is a recognition that Westchester, which is not seen as a great agricultural breadbasket, can in fact grow a certain amount of these products themselves. And I think our support for the local farmers markets, and I go to all of them and I'm familiar with all of them, and to some degree how they get their product. I think if we have more of that Westchester-based agriculture, we can certainly do that. But I do think, to the questioner's question, we are in the infancy of that area of public policy. We have not historically done a lot in recent years. There was a time when Westchester was an agricultural county in the main. But because of its suburban growth and the cul-de-sacs and the value of the land, every time you have an open piece of land, it almost always gets gobbled up for market rate housing and individual single-family housing complexes as well as high-rise buildings. So I think we have a long way to go to accomplish what the caller envisions us being able to do. And I would welcome that person to reach out to us. If they reach out, I'll give the same point of contact. Bridget Gibbons, although Peter McCart, our Director of Sustainability, will probably be very important in that conversation. He's the fellow who's keeping an eye, along with Aviva Meyer, over the top on what we're doing at Hilltop Hanover. We'll talk to the individual, and we'll see just what their thinking is, and do they have some set of resources that can mesh with what the county's doing.
Well, we're just at almost 7 o'clock, but I think we have the perfect last question to ask here. So the audience member writes, "Are you optimistic about Westchester's chances for recovery?"
I am. I'm optimistic without being starry-eyed about it, and I think the way we've tried to approach this all through this pandemic, from when we found out of our first positive case in March, and we even were talking about coronavirus previously. We had Dr. Amler had a press availability in late January, and we talked about this in February. At the time, I got the flu shot and so forth. I'm optimistic because we are realistic. It is not realistic to talk about things that might happen, but we have no idea if they're going to happen anytime soon. We wait for medical science to develop a vaccine and an antiviral treatment. And I mentioned both of them because when a person becomes sick, you'll need the antiviral treatment. The vaccine alone will only matter in the front end of what might be infection. When medical science has it available, not a doctor here or a promising trial there, when we're fully sure that we've got the right medical treatment, then I think you'll see the beginning of the full recovery of the society. But it won't happen overnight. I've talked to plenty of people, even when we open up restaurants, we open up shopping in malls. There's a certain quadrant of people that are not ready yet to interact with the society the way they did on February 15th. And I think we have to respect the fact that our wanting it to be so is not automatically going to make it so. So I think we level with people. I think we talk honestly. We share information about the disease honestly. If there's an uptick, we say so. If there's a spike, we say so. If we control the spike, and then we've had a positive result out of that, then you have some confidence in the things we're saying. But if we say whatever it is we think to say just to get through the conversation, then that's foolish, and then you would be disappointed by the end result over time. I think we're going to get through this because I have confidence in medical science. I also have confidence in the resiliency of us as individuals. We have never been through a pandemic like this in our lifetime. We read about what happened 100 years ago, and that was, in my case, my grandmother and grandfather, who were adults at the time in Westchester County when the last pandemic came through. My mother was born shortly after those pandemics were over in the early 1920s. But I'm also optimistic because I know from listening, or kind of listening, to the stories that my parents told about the Great Depression and World War II. I was born after World War II, so I have no personal knowledge of these things. And when my parents would talk to me, I'd be honest, when I was 14, 15 years old, I wasn't listening very carefully. I was more interested in playing with my friends and doing whatever it is I wanted to do with my free time. But they talked about the sacrifice that they had made during the Depression. My mom and dad were both working class folks. They both dropped out of school to work to help support their families. And they did physical labor. My mom, up to the end of her days, worked in factories. My dad was a maintenance man, worked with her hands. And they showed resiliency. And that is a fundamental American sense of optimism that comes from hard work and resiliency. And I believe that too. And they satisfied the test of their generation going through the Depression and World War II. So now it's my generation and the couple of generations right after mine. I'm a baby boomer. I know we're kind of a hated generation these days, but baby boomers, Gen Xers, millennials, Zoomers, I think is the way we're naming these generations. It's not for me to name them. We're now being tested. And I'm not Pollyanna-ish about what it will take for us to get through this. It takes continued sacrifice. We have to wear masks, and I don't really want to wear a mask. But you wear it because it's prudent. When we open up a beach, we do it because we think we can manage it properly, and so we did, and so it was managed properly. And that gives you confidence that we're not just making public policy out of what we would like to be, or because we think politically it advantages us. So I am optimistic, but I'm optimistic that our natural sense of hard work, intelligence, to some extent this kind of openness where we talk about these things out loud, we make sort of community decisions or societal decisions. Yes, we can have Bicycle Sunday. No, we can't go to Playland Amusement Park. That's not manageable. This is manageable. And if you extrapolate that through the society, if we can stay focused, we'll get through this. It'll take time. It'll take sacrifice. We're going to have economic problems. We're going to try to be as creative in this day as Franklin Roosevelt once was creative during the Great Depression. But we will get through it, and we'll get through it because we respect each other and because we're working together on this. And not because, by the way, there's any county executive has all the answers. No county executive has all the answers. No politician has all the answers. We people working together, that's how we're going to find our answer.
What's that last question?
Very good. Well, thank you very much for watching. I don't know if we've gone over a little bit in time. We appreciate you tuning in. I am sorry for the one-way dialogue that this represents. I'd much rather be in the local firehouse in Ardsley or the senior center in Portchester alongside a county legislator having the more normal give and take of conversation. We will do those things once the society opens up and allows us to do that. But until then, we'll be back 2 weeks from tonight, and we'll have another one of these, if one-way dialogues at least, we're talking in as openly as we can about one of the other major issues. We will work hard on the economic development issues that are before us. Hopefully we'll do a good job, and hopefully you'll benefit from it. I'm George Latimer, County Executive. Thanks for watching. Have a good afternoon, good evening, and stay safe.